Look, I'm not going to lie. Podcasting is a pretty easy venture to get into, but there's a question as old as podcasting itself. Should you pay to podcast? Let's figure that out.
Playing the Misfit Heroes podcast.
Okay, Misfits, if you've been paying attention to these how-to videos on podcasting that I've been doing, I've been showing you the easiest and most cost-effective ways of creating a podcast. But let's say you've got a little bit of a budget set aside for this podcasting journey. Is it worth it to pay for a podcast host? And what are the best options for you? Well, let's indulge.
Treat yourself.
First, let's go over the free options I've mentioned in the past. In one of the first videos in the series, I reviewed Anchor.fm, which is now Spotify for podcasters. This is actually the service I started on, and for most people, this is going to meet most podcasters' needs. It's a great jumping off point, and using a 301 redirect, if you ever want to transition to another provider later on in the future when you get a little bit more involved, Spotify for podcasters makes it relatively easy. The Spotify for Podcasters app makes it simple to record, edit, and upload your podcast episodes to your RSS feed, and it gives you pretty healthy control over most of your podcast settings. There are some downsides, though. This platform is not IAB compliant, so you can't share your actual podcast numbers and analytics and statistics with advertisers and potential sponsors. And while the service mentions that there are advertiser offers directly through Spotify, anyone who's actually used the service for any given amount of time will tell you that these offers are really few and far between, and they're generally offered to podcasts with a very large audience. Generally with at least 100,000 downloads per episodes in my experience. Also, for video podcasts, Spotify for Podcasters is the easiest way to upload video podcasts for playing on Spotify's platform. This is a huge benefit, and it makes uploading video a cinch. Spotify for Podcasters is great, but there is definitely competition in the free podcast hosting space. Spotify's biggest competitor is RedCircle, which is a lesser known but equally effective podcast host. The services are near identical in their function and abilities, with a few minor differences to note. For audio uploads, the file size is limited to 200 megabytes per upload versus 250 megabytes at Spotify. This could mean more changes in your editing workflow to get your file size smaller on longer episodes. There are also paid plans at RedCircle which give you more benefits like one-click video uploading to YouTube, premium analytics, and the ability to make your own ads, which is a free feature over at Spotify for Podcasters. Plans start out at $15 a month, and they allow for various upgrades and scalability options as your podcast grows. The final free option I'm going to go over in detail on this episode is Podbean, which, compared to the other two free options here, I would consider this a kinda option. Podbean's been around for a minute in the podcast hosting arena, and they're a super solid platform. They offer a ton of features for free, including IAB certified analytics, which is big. They also offer you your own podcast website on their free plan, which is also a big deal. Now, while it isn't a custom domain like mine over at www.misfit-heroes.com, in my opinion, there's a big downside, though, with choosing Podbean as a free plan, and that is the 500 megabyte upload limit. From what I see, that is not per upload, that is in total. In my situation, that would limit me to about 4 episodes before I'd need to move to a bigger plan. Also, the audio quality is limited to 128 kilobits per second, which means your audio on the free plan is not going to be very high quality. I max all my recordings out to 320 kilobits per second, which is why my audio sounds as good as it does.
What I believe you were trying to say is thank you.
Thank you?
You're welcome.
To put that in perspective, let's imagine you're going to a music festival like Woodstock back in the 1960s. But rather than playing the music through those big classic JBL speaker systems that they played through, instead they're going to be playing their sets through a much smaller setup, like the speakers in your car. Well, that would make Jimi Hendrix's legendary Star-Spangled Banner performance not really as much of an iconic American piece of musical history. It may not seem like a big deal, but it makes a huge difference to your listener. So, those free options are great and all, but you're here to be the best, and you've got to spend money to make money, right?
Who are you talking to right now?
Here's my choices for the best paid podcast host, in no particular order. Let's start with what I consider the Honda versus Toyota choices of podcast providers. You can't really go wrong with these big two providers. They're solid, dependable, and they have top-notch support. If you've been researching podcast hosting at all, you probably know right now that I'm talking about Buzzsprout and Libsyn. Now, I've met with the teams at both of these companies, and the first thing I want to say about each of them is their support is phenomenal. If you have any, and I mean any questions about either of these platforms or how to utilize them, the support staff wants to help you in my experience, even going so far as to help you come up with a solution that will work with you better. I even had lunch with them just to chat, and they're good like that. This is unprecedented in the field, and it stands out. But let's go over their features. Both companies do offer free plans, but they remove your episodes automatically after 90 days. So, yeah, don't do that. As far as plans go, they're both pretty cheap. Buzzsprout starts out at $12 a month, while Libsyn is pulling out all the stops starting at $3 a month. Pricing-wise, we lean towards Libsyn out of these two, obviously. They both do what the free platforms from afore do, and they offer unlimited hosting and bandwidth, with monthly storage upload limits. The big focus here is control of your podcast and analytics. In my experience, you'll get a much more in-depth view of where your listeners are originating from, when they start and stop listening to your show, so you can figure out topics that the listeners like to pay attention to, and where people are finding your podcast online, which are invaluable time-saving tools to know where and how to get your podcast out on the internet. But the real reason you should pay for any of these platforms is kind of hidden. With all the paid platforms I'm showing you here, you have complete control over your podcast. Remember earlier when I talked about IAB compliance? Well, if you don't know, that term means that your analytics are completely transparent with your potential advertisers. So, advertisers can verify that your audience is the size that you claim they are without you doing anything. Now, why is this important to you? Well, I'm going to introduce you to some sites that connect podcasters to advertising companies and sponsorships. My big three that I recommend for ease of use are Podcorn, AdsWiz, and Commission Junction. With these sites, they allow simple ad revenue streams to be incorporated quickly into your podcast. Heck, Podcorn is so easy, you can obtain sponsorship deals at the click of a button on your phone. But why am I mentioning these right now? Well, let's look at the requirements. Podcorn, for example, uses an analytics prefix that attaches code to your podcast RSS feed, and it verifies your statistics so that potential advertisers can quickly and easily see what your reach is without needing to do a ton of research about your show. The problem with free hosting providers is that they don't give you control over your podcast, so it limits you quite a bit in this capability. Look at this platform list that Podcorn recommends. Do you notice anything that sticks out? The free platforms don't work. Have you ever heard the phrase, when the product is free, you are the product? Well, it applies directly in this case. Now, does this mean that you can't get sponsors? Not at all. It's just done differently on the free platforms, and it's not as streamlined. You'll generally need to reach out to these companies directly and in a less automated fashion. Now, I've discussed the big two, Libsyn and Buzzsprout, but are there any other honorable mentions for paid hosts? Sure. There's definitely some other reputable companies out there. A few good options are Acast, mainly because of the ease of use in onboarding and getting your podcast set up. There's also Captivate, which I'd recommend for their integrated all-in-one marketing setup. You can easily set up and transition outside of your audio podcast and internally create clips for social media and other methods of promotion. Castto is a good option for business podcasters that are looking to create sales funnels and direct potential customers to your product or service. And then finally, if you're a really big podcaster, there's Megaphone, which offers a lot of enterprise-level features that big-time pros are going to use, like 24/7 live support, business forecasting tools to let you see the potential number of listeners based on specific marketing strategies, and so on and so forth. If you're even considering this platform, you're getting at least 20,000 downloads an episode. They won't even work with you. You're also extremely wealthy, and you're probably not looking for a budget-friendly alternative. People envy you, and let's face it, you're probably better than the rest of us, and you want to make it known. I get it. So, now that I've laid out a bunch of options on the table, maybe I should answer the initial question. Which should I jump for, paid hosting or a free hosting platform? I think that answer relies completely on what your goal is for podcasting and how much experience you have in the field. I see far too many people go to a paid platform right out of the gate and then get discouraged when they have low engagement and low listener numbers in their analytics. I think this can easily discourage many people from the entire field of podcasting right from the start. So, in my opinion, it's important to set some tiny goals and expectations from your podcast. If you're just starting out, I'm just going to say it. Just use a free plan. You can always upgrade later, and many, if not most, podcasters follow this trajectory. It's just very hard to justify the cost associated with hosting at a premium provider when the free services have the majority of the services that the paid providers offer. I started with Anchor.fm, and then I've gone to Buzzsprout, Libsyn, and a number of other providers as well. My plan of action for a brand new podcaster would be a free provider like Spotify or RedCircle. And then as you grow above, say, 1,000 to 2,000 downloads per episode and have a dedicated community that's going to follow you around wherever you go, consider the monetization elements available by the paid providers and see if it makes sense for your comfort level. So, I hope that helps you make some choices about your podcast provider. A great idea I'd recommend if you're thinking of choosing a paid platform is to contact them directly on their support pages of their website. You can actually call and speak to many of them.
I didn't know I couldn't do that.
In the end, there's no cookie-cutter choice in this field, but I think the in-depth analysis here will provide you with some unknown insight that you won't find elsewhere. There's one other option I want to recognize here, and that's the idea of decentralized podcasting. One of my favorite podcasters, Adam Curry, also known as the godfather of podcasting, has coined the term Podcasting 2.0 and created the Podcast Index, which aims to give more power to the creator of the podcast and decentralize the idea of podcasting as a whole. Many large podcast platforms like Apple and Google Podcasts have taken it upon themselves to censor certain opinions. The entire idea of podcasting, in my opinion, is one of the last hopes for free speech around the globe, and it allows the small voices to share their ideas and voices on a global scale. In a landscape where mass market media companies control what is and isn't made a big news story, this is so important to humanity. Think about it. We live in a constant state of information overload, and with so few trusted news sources and agendas being pushed into and from every possible angle, podcasting allows real stories to be shared in places and ways that they never could have before. So, if you're interested in this idea, head on over to podcastindex.org and check it out. They've got so much info, you could do a deep dive. Shout out to Adam Curry. He is a podcasting goat. That's my time, Misfits. As always, if this helped you in any way whatsoever, please dramatically agitate that like and subscribe button, and be sure to leave a rating or review of the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You can also check out all these options on my website over at www.misfit-heroes.com, and if you do nothing else in this world today, remember, be kind, love one another, and be a hero.